Hello, everybody. Welcome to the GFSI webinar on the Race to the Top feature 1. We will give people a couple of minutes to finish joining and we'll start very soon. So just make yourself comfortable. We will start in a minute. In the meantime, I just would like to highlight to everybody that during this webinar, we will be answering questions from the audience, so yourself. If you want to send any questions at any time when we are talking, you can use the chat function to send your questions. They will be coming to us and I will be asking the question as I am moderating this session for you today. I would like to also remind you that you are in listening mode only, so we cannot hear you. Therefore, if you have comments or questions, it is important that you use the chat function so that we get your input into this conversation. So before we get properly started onto the topic of today, which is feature 1 of the Race to the Top, GFSI, I would like to introduce the panelists for today's session. So my name is Marie-Claude Quentin. I'm a Senior Technical Manager for the Global Food Safety Initiative at the Consumer Goods Forum. And my role mainly evolves around maintaining the benchmarking requirements for GFSI and applying the benchmarking process to recognize certification program owners. I have been leading the development of the benchmarking requirements that we will talk about today, a brand new set of benchmarking requirements for GFSI, but I was extremely supported by the two panelists that we have with us today, John Poole, Chief Executive of the IFST. Hello, John. And Andrew Clark, Director of Quality Assurance for Control Brand at Loblaw. So thank you very much, both of you, for joining us today. It's a pleasure.
Thank you, Mary.
I would like to also add that, John, you were actually chairing the technical working group who came up with the benchmarking requirements that are currently under consultation through the GFSI website. And Andrew, you were a member, a very active member of that working group. You also serve as co-chair of the Stakeholder Advisory Forum, the GFSI working group who maintains the benchmarking requirements applicable to certification program owners. So thank you both. Did I forget anything important about you two?
That's fine from me, Marie-Claude.
Yeah, no, I think you got everything, Marie-Claude.
Brilliant. I was just testing your microphone. I knew I got it right. So. All right. Before I hand over the floor to the two of you for a little bit of a conversation around the work you have been doing for GFSI over the last 12 months, I just want to bring us all back to the context of this work that you have been doing. As many of you now know, GFSI in October 2019 was challenged by their members to ensure that the food safety output of certified organization continued to improve, and therefore that the consistency and quality of audit was raised continuously as challenges in food safety continued to be, as challenges to the food safety continued to be faced by the food industry. Between October 2019 and March 2020, GFSI therefore embarked on a series of consultations with many of our stakeholders to identify opportunities to essentially increase GFSI influence over the whole certification ecosystem which we preside over. It is important to realize that at GFSI, we oversee certification program owners, but we do this work with the purpose of improving and harmonizing food safety outcome of certified organization. Between us, GFSI, and those certified organizations, there are many important parties, the certification program owners, who we oversee directly, but also accreditation bodies, certification bodies, and very importantly, auditors, who we're going to talk about today. In March 2020, at the end of this consultative period, we announced what we called the Race to the Top, a framework that was designed to increase food safety outcome and harmonization of certified sites. And we also announced 4 initial features which focused on the improvement of the benchmarking activities we preside over. Feature 1 was the creation of a brand new set of benchmarking requirements addressing training organizations for food safety auditors. And the objective was to ensure the consistency of competency in food safety auditors in a way that GFSI could actually act. So we are a benchmarking organization. We do not deliver training. We do not write standards. But what we do, and is actually part of our core competence at GFSI, is we benchmark organization. And the proposal in that feature is to take the expertise we have in benchmarking, developed over 20 years with the assessment of certification program owners, to organizations who preside over competence of food safety auditors. With that framework on which we consulted last year, we mandated a working group to write the benchmarking requirements. And that working group, as I mentioned, was chaired by John Paul, and who's here with us today, and Susan Rank, who represented an accreditation body. And today we're going to talk to you about the approach this working group has taken to come up with the benchmarking requirements. Very importantly as well, the approach that they suggest we take as a community on the management of competence of food safety auditors, including the importance of continuing professional development. And very crucially, what you can do to take part in this conversation that we are continuing on the competence of auditors. So this is the context. I'm not going to ask you, John, to explain a little bit about what the working group has been doing or was doing since until March 2021, when they handed over their work to us.
Thanks, Marie-Claude. And yes, thank you for inviting me to be part of this this webinar today. This has been quite a fascinating journey and has involved a lot of parties. And what's been quite fascinating for me chairing this has been to be able to listen to and take into account the views across a whole series of stakeholders, from the CPOs, the certification bodies, those representing auditors, and those representing those that are being audited. So really to see all of those different angles and understand and hopefully address the issues that each have had. The main focus of what we're now proposing, what you see, hopefully have read and see in front of you, is a recognition program for bodies that will recognize the competence and validate the competence of auditors. Marie-Claude's just mentioned about the need for consistency of competence of auditors, and that's really what we're looking for by focusing particularly on the recognition program for what we're calling a professional recognition body. Professional body, we see professional recognition bodies in most professions, whether you're a lawyer, an accountant, health professionals. It is an independent body that can provide the proper recognition of competence for auditors. And we'll see that hopefully as we go through this discussion, where that fits in terms of the relationship with various stakeholders, but particularly its impact for auditors. What you'll see is that we're focusing, although we started off looking, and Marie-Claude mentioned training organisations, where we've ended up is to focus particularly on the competence of auditors and how that's recognised. Because ultimately what we've seen is that auditors come into their roles from so many and into the profession in so many different ways. Some will come into the profession through formal routes and through having achieved sort of a high level of academic qualification, and others will have gained their experience on job. And it's really important, therefore, that we focus not on the training journey, but really on the outputs of that, which is whether or not the auditor can prove competence. And the way we've done that is to set out very clearly the knowledge, the skills, the behaviours and the attitudes that we would expect to see from a competent food safety auditor. And the great thing about that is it means that we've got clarity for potential new entrants into the profession, and of course for existing auditors as well. So this allows, if you like, a multiple entry point into the profession, and therefore addresses one of the critical elements of how can we attract more auditors into food safety auditing and into the profession. And many of those that have been on the working group will know that I've likened this to the journey of learning to drive, in that really at the end of the day, it's whether or not you can prove to an examiner that you are competent as a driver. And really the way that you learn to drive, whether it's through sitting with parents or friends in the car, or whether it's going through a formal training program in a car, that's less important than whether you can prove ultimately that you are competent. And that's what we've tried to create within this framework. The important thing really is that this then creates a set of common competence requirements that can be demonstrated regardless of the scheme that an auditor is working with and regardless of the CPO. It means that it is obviously at a base level of competence, and doesn't take into account the CPO specific competence requirements. We understand that, but it gives that sort of standard baseline of competence. The sort of key features, I guess, there's a couple that I like to really highlight, because as well as just proving competence, the individual signs up to what is known as a professional code of conduct, which is really critical that they understand that they have to comply with that. And another key feature is what we call continuing professional development, or CPD. And CPD is understood by some people, and I think it is understood by people in different ways, and it's worth just clarifying what we believe we mean by this. Continuing professional development really is something which needs to be maintained throughout a professional's whole career, and is a mixture of two things really. One is about keeping up to date. If you don't even change the role just to keep standing still, there is so much happening around us in the way of changes to standards, improvements of technologies, emerging threats, changes to legislation, and just to stand still, it's important that auditors are able to prove that they are keeping up to date. The second area, which I think is also critical actually, is more than just keeping up to date, but growing as a professional and obviously developing their role as an auditor. And therefore it links really well with demonstrating a clear career path for an auditor. As they grow, they will want to develop themselves in new techniques, new skills, new behaviors as they grow. So those you'll see in the proposal and are critical parts of the process. So what we've created, just to finish really, is really a proposed framework in two parts. The first element is about the governance of the professional recognition body. How does it need to operate in order to be able to prove that it is a competent and reliable and independent body that can prove the competence of auditors? And the second is, how does it go about proving that and validating the competence of auditors in terms of the knowledge, skills and behaviours? We've set those out, what we deem as being the essential elements of being a professional food safety auditor, and we want to be able to be assured that the professional recognition bodies that choose to apply for this are going to be able to prove that competence. So that's my opener, I guess, Marie-Claude, if that helps.
Thank you very much, John. A very, very good opener and a very good explanation of the context and work of the working group that led to the consultation that is underway today in GFSI. So great context. Now I'm going to move to you, Andrew. I would like to know what value that independent recognition is going to bring to businesses. I'm not going to talk to you about Andrew, the member of the working group, but Andrew, the global director for QA at Loblaw. Is that going to give you any more confidence? Is that a good news for you, or is this actually making things a bit more complicated than they really need to be?
I think potentially from the outset it could be viewed as more complex, because there's a view that it adds an extra layer of governance, when from my opinion it doesn't. It sort of moves it as such to some other body that's obviously the professional recognition body, that actually this is what they do for a living, this is their bread and butter. So I think having that level of transparency certainly improves things to a significant degree from my perspective, because then I've got the assurance that I can review potentially the auditor's credentials on whether they've got the product category, their years of experience and so on. I think that's important for us, because as an industry we want to see improved consistency of audits. I think that's been a factor that we've all talked about for an awfully long time. What I will say is I was on the working group for auditor competence years back, and what I like about this group is the fact that it's moved so fast in comparison. It's unbelievable, and the output that we've got, I think, is pretty robust myself. So from my perspective, Loblaw perspective, and how we look at, obviously, how we look at auditing, it forms a significant part of our food safety management, and we rely on GFSI audits for our control brand vendors, so we need to make sure that they are consistent. And I think this approach will certainly provide that to us. I do think it will take a lot of the repetition away from qualifying auditors from certification bodies, and I think that's important that we all look at the positives and not looking at it as extra work, because for instance, if an auditor's recognised for certain standards with one CB, they've got the potential to be recognised for those at another CB, with this approach. Another thing is when auditors are qualified, they have to go through a series of shadow and witness audits, which are often the contractual auditors don't get paid for, because it's part of their growth and their onboarding, and sometimes they don't get paid for that. So it's a redundancy and it's added cost to them, so it'll remove that. I think we need to rely on the process and make sure we trust in the qualification process, but I think having this central repository of information is required, so we've got that level of transparency, and it's not about removing auditors that are not doing a good job. It's actually recognizing the ones that do a good job, because I think we're significantly lagging behind other industries when it comes to auditing and recognizing the food safety auditing as a career. And often and as you all know, a lot of people fall into auditing towards the end of their career. We're seeing certainly people leaving the career of food safety auditing, particularly with the pandemic, where people haven't been traveling, and people that have been close to retirement have thought, I just don't want to do it anymore. So it's a sense of urgency to get this up and running, to actually finally provide the career path for what you need to do to become an auditor, and also raise awareness, but give that kudos to the career, because it is important. It's significantly important. I think often what auditors do is overlooked. If we think about how many, for instance, how many non-conformances, how many corrective actions from GFSI audits are identified and closed each year, that's an awful lot. Thousands, we're talking about thousands of potential food safety incidents. And I think we always focus on, well, the auditor didn't find this, the auditor didn't find that, but we don't actually recognize what they do find and how we do improve things. You know, I'm the first one to criticize an auditor, and trust me, I do when there's a job done badly, but also it's not an easy job, and it's time that we did have this career path. And I think what we've done here with this approach is much needed and long overdue, and I think it's excellent what's come out of this. And obviously the consultation is ongoing. It hasn't finished yet, so people have got the chance to feed back on that. But I think we need to focus on the positives rather than looking at it as extra work, because in reality it's not. I do feel that food safety auditors will, over time, when things are new, people don't like them, we all know that, but over time they will embrace it, and they will see the potential for what we can do with this approach, particularly in terms of sharing information, because I think it's important that we do that and we have that level of transparency which we've not had before. It's significantly important to the industry, to actually the future of food safety auditing, but food safety in general, because there's an awful lot of reliance on the work that comes out from these auditors, and it's time they receive the recognition they deserved. And I think this is an excellent approach, but it's early stages, obviously, but I would recommend that everyone takes a positive look at this and not try to see some pitfalls all over the place. And if you've got ideas for improvement, obviously feed that back to us, because I think it's important that we get that information, because it will help to provide and build a robust process for qualification of auditors. It doesn't take anything away from what obviously the certification bodies and the CPOs do in terms of training and all the rest of it. It's actually recognizing that and as a profession, you know, and I think it gives a lot more emphasis on the importance of what they do, and I'm looking forward to it kicking off. I truly am, obviously as a retailer, and as I said, how much we rely on consistency of audits. It's certainly a good thing, and we need to get more people into the profession, and we need to do it sooner rather than later.
Thank you, Andrew. So if you allow me, I'll complement your very helpful comments with a couple of points. We wrote benchmarking requirements, as you say, based on the competency expected in any food safety auditors, regardless actually of the scheme or standard they are auditing against. And so I think this is quite interesting as well to see the potential here to support not only the GFSI recognized certification programs potentially, but also other schemes, third-party schemes, regulatory schemes, or in fact second-party schemes. So would that be fair to say, John or Andrew, that the way this set of competency was written was referring to international standards such as ISO 17021 and focusing on the validation of competencies expected in any food safety auditors, and therefore could be that recognition of registration of auditors could be used for any food safety auditors out there to demonstrate their competence and value.
Yeah, and I think it's important to recognise, and I'll give you an example with when I worked at the Food Standards Agency years ago, and I got the Food Law Code of Practice recognised by IRCA. And my job, because I worked as an auditor of regulators, and we audited local authority, I think it gave structure to the auditors that work for the Food Standards Agency, and it gave them the recognition that they didn't have before. So I think one of the benefits from established auditors is having that recognition internationally, because IRCA and the other bodies that are similar give that recognition, and I thought it was a good approach, and it actually made sure that established auditors followed CPD, that they kept an audit log, so they've got that awareness, they've got that history, and so on. So I think that the benefit for established auditors can't be overlooked at all, because it did give that recognition, and we managed to get all the Food Standards Agency auditors recognised because of the approach we took. And I think that was one of my objectives when I started with the Food Standards Agency, but I enjoyed it because I learned a lot from it, and I thought the governance of the approach was significant, and it gave value, and as I keep saying, the recognition of food safety auditing as a profession. And so that can't be overlooked or dismissed, because it's incredibly important. And I think all the auditors that I worked with certainly enjoyed the fact that they'd got that recognition as a lead auditor, because obviously there's different approaches. You can be sort of a trainee auditor and so on, but they all managed to get the lead auditor qualification because of the number of audits they'd done in their background. So I think it's incredibly important that we recognise that.
Thank you. John, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, just a comment really, and that is that when we started developing the set of competence requirements for the auditors, we effectively started with a clean sheet of paper initially, and defined what do we see as being an absolute requirement for a food safety auditor. Having said that, that would just be a pointless exercise if we then completely ignored all of those other standards which you just mentioned. And so having created that, first of all, we were then able to cross-reference and make sure that where there was an appropriate standard defined already, there was no point in duplicating what was already there, and so there isn't duplication in this. Where there is an appropriate standard referencing one of the competence requirements, it's in there, and if it isn't, it's only through error. And if you've got any feedback on areas where you think we ought to reference another competence standard, then fine. But the important thing to note is, yeah, it references all of the standards where we believe it's that recognition needs to be proved through a standard, and obviously then there are nuances in there which are specific to the scheme where needed as well.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you, John, a question that just came through the chat. Actually, questions are starting to come very fast. So somebody wants to know a little bit more about the advances regarding the critical knowledge experience that is expected according to this new set of requirements. So for example, what requirements are they? Do these new requirements set in terms of hazard analysis knowledge, risk analysis, food defense, food fraud? Can you give us example of the sort of competence that were listed and included in those requirements?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it would be best for you to read that within the document, because it's set out quite clearly in that. What I would say is that in terms of the structure, there are, firstly, we've set out the knowledge and skills, and let's be clear on what those are. Knowledge, obviously, what you know or what you need to know, and the skills, what you need to be able to apply in terms of food auditing. And then the behaviours are those which supplement and support the individual in the role that they're doing. Now, then we've broken it down into those sort of technical areas where we understand the need for the auditor to have good technical knowledge and knowledge of the standards and of the legislation. But then the interesting thing, which is that we also then look at some of the other requirements of competence which make up a fully rounded auditor. So you'll see in there that we've also included areas such as the individual's ability to be able to deal with data and analytical and communication skills and all of those essential elements of being an auditor. It isn't just about being able to tick boxes against a standard, but it describes the whole piece that makes a competent auditor. And I think it's those areas which for me are the most interesting. You could fairly easily put together what are required in terms of the technical areas, in terms of the HACCP, understanding of HACCP and the food safety legislation. But it's when you move into the other areas about defining how an individual should behave, for instance, in terms of being able to be robust and resilient, but also able to influence effectively in putting their message across within an audit.
Thank you very much, John. So just ask for the link to the consultation to be shared with the audience. So if you go to the chat now, everybody, you will see the link to the consultation, which will take you to the document that John was mentioning, listing all the skill and knowledge that are expected in a food safety auditor according to this document. I think it would be also important to highlight before somebody asks a question, right, that the document, the requirement do not state how the competence should be verified, right? So we're not talking about reinstating your GFSI knowledge exam. There, said it, yeah, this is not coming back. We are leaving to the professional recognition body to decide how they will validate and verify the competence of the auditor. And that's your point, right, about multi-entry points and competence versus training. Is that right, yes. John?
Yeah, absolutely. So professional bodies, I'm aware of quite a number, and they will operate very slightly differently in terms of the way they validate both the initial assessment of individuals, but also the ongoing CPD, the continuing professional development. So ours is to define what we expect in terms of seeing that they are have validation processes in place. We want to hear from them how they expect to do that.
Okay, brilliant. Another question that came through, which I'm going to complement with another one I received earlier. Is there an international body out there that has food safety specialists? And I will complement that question by saying, you know, do such organizations already exist globally? Those PRB, who are they? Are they something new we came up with, or are there people out there who could actually become, who today operate and could become GFSI recognized PRBs?
Andrew, do you want to cover?
You to decide which one of you wants to take that one.
I'm happy to come in to say that when we were creating this, we were very concerned that we weren't creating what we would call a white elephant, something that couldn't be fulfilled. And so, yeah, whilst you know, we're defining something which is specific to our needs, we do believe there will be organizations out there who would want to apply for that. I mean, one that springs to mind is IRCA, which already operates an auditor professional recognition scheme. We would want an organization such as that to come to us with, or to GFSI, with a proposal as to how that would be specifically tailored to GFSI's requirements. And so, yes, we do believe there are bodies out there, but also there may be, as well as that, I mean, the chances are those bodies are out there and we're looking for those that can prove their competence already. But there may be other organizations, which is why we referred to them as entities for quite a while, who decide that actually this is something that they wish to set up as a scheme. They may have similar experience but want to set up something specifically to apply to become recognized as a professional body through GFSI.
Did you want to add anything, Andrew?
No, not really. Just that the organisations, the frameworks do exist, and as I mentioned when I was in the opening remarks, that we're lagging behind other industries in terms of recognising food safety auditors as a profession in the same manner as some, sort of the aerospace and medical devices and the like, which have been recognised for a long time. So let's sort of start that process, because it does, the framework does exist.
Okay, thank you. I will refer to, there are organizations out there who are dedicated to the development of food safety professionals broadly, right? And have these schemes to help people like me, for example, to maintain their knowledge and skills in food safety. And so those organizations can decide to actually develop a program dedicated to food safety auditors, because they're already in the frame of maintaining and developing competence in food safety professionals. So loads of questions coming through now, so I'm going to try and make sure I ask them to you. Right, how do you see the role of the certification bodies in qualifying food safety auditors in the future, or in complementing the role of the PRB? So how do the two work together? You're muted.
They still play, they still play a very important role. I don't think it's taken away anything from the work that's being done by the CBs in terms of recognising and auditors and doing the shadow audits and that type of thing. I still think there's a part to play, because they've got the relationship with the auditors and they understand them and so on. So I think I see the PRBs more of a sort of a support to them, really, and sort of standardising the approach that CBs take to a degree. And so by doing that, taking away some of the duplication which the CBs are doing between themselves, which we know exists now through the recognition and the sharing of information. I know not everyone's comfortable with that, but I think it's the way forward from my perspective.
Okay. John, have you managed to activate your microphone? Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. And can I link that to another question, which is in there, Marie-Claude, about this analogy of learning to drive, and therefore, what's the role of the PRB compared with, say, the CB? When you learn to drive and you first pass your test, you are probably not really competent, in the sense that you still need to gain that experience. And I think that there are two elements to that then. So part of that is about the ongoing CPD, but also it's really useful to have somebody in the car with you when you first pass your test to give you some reassurance. And I think that role of accompanied audits, where you've got the auditor going out there, but and they may still be qualified, but the fact that they've got somebody else to accompany them or to shadow them as they gain their experience is a critical part of the process. And that wouldn't be fulfilled by the professional recognition body, but that would really be the CB's role to help to support individuals as they grow in their experience.
Thank you too. Yeah, I would say that there's also an opportunity for the certification bodies to actually use the registration to PRB as one of the proof of competence that they would refer to demonstrate why they decided to recruit this auditor, or what training they need to provide that auditor, in fact.
Yeah, it's a great baseline, really, isn't it? Because you imagine the situation, a CB advertises for auditors. They've got a whole, a pack of, let's say, 20 applications. I'm being positive here. They've got a pack of about 20 applications to look through, and if they can look on the bottom of that CV and see that 10 of those people have already been professionally recognised through a recognised PRB, then that's a great justification and makes that recruitment process so much easier. What you're also going to find from that is that auditors who are thinking of applying for roles, when they see that one of the requirements from a CB is that they should ideally have recognition through a PRB, they're going to go out and seek that to make sure that they've got that, to make sure that they're employable. So it really will hopefully drive up the standards and hopefully attract more people into the sector. And then, of course, as you say, once the CB has appointed some of these auditors, then that's a great baseline to use in terms of their agreeing the personal development plan. So if somebody has got that as a baseline, then that helps them to understand what next in terms of developing them to be the auditor they need in their organisation.
Thank you. I want to come back to one of the first questions that was sent to us via the chat, because it's relevant to what you just said. Somebody was challenging us that this model might be more beneficial to auditors who today work as freelance than to auditors who are fully employed and therefore supported by their certification body as an employee. So as an employee, you get personal development plans and access to training rather than in freelance. But would you say that is a fair assessment, or do you see the same benefits, the same level of benefits applying to both types of auditors?
I think that there are benefits for both, to be honest, and you know, what it does in terms of those that are employed through a CB who might provide specific training is it allows the auditor to recognize what training they're receiving and to align what they're receiving as training to their own personal development plan. My ideal out of this, by the way, is really that auditors take personal responsibility for their own personal growth and development. So whether they're employed by a CB or whether they're independent, I think that my preference would be to see auditors taking personal responsibility for that. And it gives meaning to the development that they get. They can hope if they're within a CB, but it also helps to give structure for those that are independent to help them understand what is expected, what they need to put in place in terms of their CPD during a year. And I would hope that most will then formulate their own personal development plan, which either shows what they need to develop over the year or at least refresh during the year in order to maintain their competence.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, a couple of questions came related to who can be a PRB and how to become a GFSI recognized PRB. So what's the process for applying to GFSI to become a professional recognition body or GFSI recognized PRB? And another question related to it is, if a CB has an auditor competency program accredited to 17024, why can they not be a PRB? So I think this relates to an eligibility criteria that we set around independence from of the PRB to any certification activities to a food safety scheme, right? So is that true that a CB could not become a PRB, or is it just an interpretation of that eligibility criteria?
I was hoping you were going to answer that yourself, Marie.
Yeah, I can try if you want. I can certainly address the number one, which is how do you apply? When we will publish the final benchmarking requirements, we will publish them on our website with an application form. And if you want to become a GFSI recognized professional recognition body, you just have to download and fill in the application form, send it back to us at GFSI. And then we will help you through the process of assessment to hopefully become GFSI recognized. The second question, I think saying that a CP cannot become a PRB is a bit of a blunt interpretation of the eligibility criteria, right?
Yeah.
So that'd be fair to say, yeah? So, because in fact, the PRB will be expected to be accredited to ISO 17024, which is a certification of personnel, and therefore they will issue certificates. Yeah, so they will be a certification body.
Yes.
But what the group wanted to make sure is there is no conflict of interest between the CB employing the food safety auditor to audit against BRC or IFS or any other food safety scheme, and the personal certification activity. So avoid the situations where I'm a certification body, I need my auditors to be registered to a GFSI recognized PRB. I know what I'll do. I'll become one and I'll just certify all my auditors. Yeah. So avoid that conflict of interest. Is that a suitable enough answer, John and Andrew?
Yeah, I agree. I very much agree there. The key element of that is the independence, isn't it, really? Because and it's also about the independence from the auditor's perspective as well. They want to know that what they have in terms of their own professional recognition can be taken. It's portable and can be taken with them. And can be used by any other body that they choose to be employed by. And therefore that independence is really important as well. So it's not impossible, as you say, but I would say it's probably geared more likely that it's going to describe an organization which is already set up and providing professional recognition in that way. So it's not impossible, but it would be difficult for them to demonstrate the right level of independence. We're not saying it's impossible, because we have sort of thought that perhaps there's an option to set up some sort of subsidiary, I guess, which might, if it could prove the right level of independence. But that's, I guess, where we're from. So yeah, I agree with you on that.
Okay, thank you. All right, many questions coming through now, which I'm delighted about. Couple of questions related to the CPOs in this new world. So what would be the role of the standard owner into the qualification process under this new proposed approach? And one directly to GFSI, actually. So will GFSI influence the CPOs to loosen their unique specific credential requirements if GFSI has a uniform audit credentialing system? Very relevant questions, actually. We're starting to touch on the potential benefits here and the complementary of roles between the PRB, the CB, and the CPO. So I'm going to ask you two, if one of you wants to try and give some elements of answers to that.
Andrew, do you want to go, or do you?
You've been very quiet, Andrew. Yes.
I know, I have, haven't I? But CPO still, obviously, they've got their relevant requirements, and this doesn't take anything away from them in terms of what they require, in terms of how they train their auditors to their specific standards and what their expectations are. It can't, because that's why all the audit standards are unique, because there's certain elements, and it's only the CPOs that can train out what the requirements are. I think what it does for a benefit for the CPOs specifically will be the fact they'll be able to gain sort of information on their the auditors that are qualified for their programs, but get independent feedback on those auditors, which I'm guessing a lot of audited sites don't always like to give feedback on auditors directly to the CPO or the CB because of repercussion. Because that's the thought. We obviously know as an industry that's not what happens. There is no repercussion, and CBs and CPOs want that feedback, but they often don't get it unless it's unless an auditor's done a good job and they've raised a lot of non-conformances. Then they get feedback. But I think it gives an opportunity to get feedback from an independent source on how audits are going, and let's not just talk about the negatives. I think we also have the opportunity for sites that have been audited well to give feedback to the PRBs that it was a good job. Let's not just keep focusing on this is bad, this is bad, this is bad. How about the fact that we from this auditor's work, we know that we're going to develop. Let's give that start giving that type of feedback, because I think it's important as a recognition. So I think CPOs could be able to use this entity as an opportunity to get feedback, which they're not getting at the moment.
Okay, but thank you very much. John?
Yeah, just it may be simplistic, but in terms of the role of the CPO, up until now, it's had to prescribe to the CB how it wishes the CBs to demonstrate confidence that it is recruiting and training up auditors. And really, it's just a realignment of that to say you can do that by simply being able to use a PRB as part of that process. And so really, in a sense, it is just a slight realignment of how you define, how it asks CBs to define the competence of its auditors, and should therefore make it simpler in that respect.
Yeah, I'd add to that, John, that a good proportion of the CPO's requirements on auditor is due to the GFSI requirements on those GFSI recognized CPOs today. And we have taken responsibility in GFSI for this, through this work. So today, GFSI requires certification program owners to ensure that competence of auditors in HACCP, experience in industry sectors, and a set and prescribed numbers of practice audits are carried out. We prescribe these to the GFSI recognized certification program owners. And of course, to maintain their recognition, CPOs then prescribe that to their CBs. Yes. And so the work the group has done, which I think is one of the greatest opportunity, is take those current GFSI requirements on auditor and move them from the CPO requirement to the PRB requirements, so that the conversation we will have after this first consultation is actually, do we simplify the requirements for CPOs on auditors as long as a PRB is involved? And so that will automatically simplify things for everybody, you know, for the CPOs, but also for the auditors and the certification bodies, crucially. So, yes. So that's the subsequent conversation after this first consultation. A very, very important point. So question 13, I think we addressed, will this make the approval of auditors easier and smoother? That's what we're aiming for, and this is why we really want you to look at the proposal we drew in the consultation and the benchmarking requirements we set out, so that you can tell us what else we could demand and add to them to ensure that the approval process of auditors is smoother and simpler, because the idea remains to facilitate entry to the profession. Yeah. So
has to be number one, doesn't it? Yeah.
That's our objective. That's a core objective. Yeah.
Yeah.
How many PRBs is GFSI expected to cover all the existing auditors globally? This we have no expectations. It could be one taking care of all auditors. It could be 10. I don't really have a target in mind. Do you have a view on this?
No, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because what you ideally want is choice, and you want to make sure that you've got global coverage. We need people to be able to access easily. So that's the critical thing. That could be achieved through one. Well, you don't get the choice if you've got one, of course, but maybe 2 or 3. I think if you were to get up as far as sort of 8 or 9, firstly, I think it'd be unlikely. But if you did that, I think probably would overcomplicate matters then, because you also need to make sure, of course, that all the PRBs are working to the same standard. What you don't want to end up with is people going, well, I must go to that PRB because I've heard that they're easier to work with, and well, easier to work with maybe, but you know, they're easier to get accredited through. So we need to maintain that standard. So my guess is that you're probably looking at 2 or 3 to get the global coverage that you need and the choice, but without it becoming populated.
Yeah, very good. I also think that we may have more than one, because some PRB might focus their validation of competence on asking for diplomas, yeah. And
Yeah.
some others might say, actually, we will do sort of apprenticeship approach, yeah. So if you've got loads of working experience, we have a way to validate this as a proof of competence. And again, you know, we go back to this. There's more than one way to become competent in a job, including becoming competent as a food safety auditors. So loads of questions have come through. I'm sure now, since we've got only 5 minutes left, that we won't go through all of them. However, that I would like to address one specifically on the timeline that was asked, actually. So very, very crucially, what is the timeline for implementation of this new approach? Our end goal is to publish the new benchmarking requirements in the autumn this year. And so at the moment, the document itself, the requirements themselves, as well as a review of the benefits targeted by the new approach are under consultation. You can access this with the link that we shared with you earlier during that call. I strongly encourage you all to take part in this consultation. We do need and we do welcome your feedback to strengthen further the proposal. We will then do a subsequent consultation on implementation and transition. So something we hardly touched on today, but of course there are thousands of working food safety auditors out there today, qualified through a set system, and we want to make sure that in the transition to the new approach, we don't lose any of you. In fact, we bring more in. Yeah, that's the objective, and so we have to think about the transition very carefully. And points like, how do we simplify the current CPO requirements driven through the GFSI requirements with this new approach will be addressed in that transition consultation. And then we will publish the requirements and start with calling for candidates, because we will then be in a bit of a chicken and egg situation. We cannot think about what reference to the PRB we will make in the CPO requirements, if any, until we have GFSI recognized professional recognition bodies in place, because that would be setting everybody to fail, right? So these are the forthcoming exciting events and steps in the development of this new approach. With 2 minutes to spare, I want to reassure you that we will take a tab of the questions that you sent us today, and we haven't had the time, unfortunately, to address, and look to address them in the summary that we will publish with the summary of this webinar. And I want to thank you very much, both of you, John, Chief Executive of the IFST, and Andrew, Director, Global Senior Director for QA at Loblaw. Thank you very much for speaking for the majority of the time and allowing me to be just the moderator with a couple of exceptions. It was important that we heard from people who will be affected directly by the new approach and have worked on this new approach for GFSI. Thank you to both of you.
Thank you, Marie-Claude. My pleasure.
Thanks both. Pleasure.